Welcome back to another FPL video where I'm going to be rating more of your FPL teams, 14 squads to be exact, just like the first video, since there were so many submissions and the reception to that video was also very good as well. On screen you can see my team selection, and you will see also in the final team selection video I'll be discussing my transfer plans for Game Weeks 9 and 10 in more detail, so be sure to tune in for that, and also the deadline stream. And across the weekend there's also going to be UCL fantasy content ahead of match day 3, so there's a lot to go through for both FPL and UCL fantasy. If you end up enjoying this video, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. We are around 70 subscribers away from 21,000, so it'd be greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. The first team covered today is by Viper4982, and he says, I've already used my wildcard, and this is going to be a very simple suggestion here because your team is in a very good position. I would bring Saka in for Son. Although it's not absolutely essential, that is a good transfer you can make, and in turn, you will have 1.3 million in the bank, which you could also use to upgrade Kabore to, let's say, Gabriel, Estupinian if he's available. You've got plenty of choices there, and Botman should be available for Game Week 9. The same goes for Saka. Let's keep an eye out for those updates. But you are one of those rare situations where you've got Trippier, Salah, Haaland, and you had Son as well at the same time. So you're in a position of strength, and because you already used the wild card, you built a lot of team value and also made a lot of good selections on the wild card too, it has to be said. So a very simple move for you. Saka in for Son in Game Week 10. If not, you can delay that move to Game Week 12 or perhaps later in the season. And also I'd look to use those extra funds to upgrade Kabore. Next up is MizashKandel's team, and he says, I've played the wildcard in Game Week 8. What would be the suggested transfer plans for later game weeks? Really need some advice for my team. Thanks. I think your team is looking in a really good position, so I'd be very comfortable and confident if I were you. And again, this is going to be a very popular topic in this video. My suggested transfer would be Heung-min Son to Saka, and also Taylor upgraded to Gabriel to give you a bit more squad depth, although it's not absolutely necessary. That is something you can also do. And then from Game Week 10 onwards, you've only got Mabama, who is kind of your benchable option every single game week, and you can rotate between Pedro Neto, Anderson and Gabriel, which could lead to some benching headaches. If you're not comfortable with that, you could just keep Taylor and avoid the Gabriel transfer and save that to upgrade another position instead. But I think Saka in for Son and Gabriel in for Taylor is the best set of moves for your FPL team. The third team is sent in by AndyN6053, and he says, I use my wildcard in Game Week 8. My transfer plans are to roll the transfer in Game Week 9, in Game Week 10 to do Son to Saka, and Pedro Porro to Gabriel. What are your thoughts? I've been following you for 2 years and would love to hear what you think. Greetings from Sweden. Thank you very much, Andy. I do appreciate that. It's always great to have people watching from all around the world. It's always a pleasure. And I think the Son to Saka transfer is definitely worth it, as I also talked about for the previous 2 examples. But I'm unsure about selling Pedro Porro to Gabriel. So if we head over to Game Week 10, this is how your team would be, set up really, just by getting Saka in for Heung-min Son. Arsenal are better defensively than Tottenham Hotspur, but Pedro Porro offers more attacking threat, and it's all a question of timing. I know the fixtures aren't particularly great from Game Week 10 onwards, and Arsenal should keep more clean sheets in that time frame, but I'm not sure if I'd sell Pedro Porro exactly, and that's something you definitely have to think about. And the only concern I would have with the Spaniard is the possible rotation with Emerson Real, who is now back from his injury. I would also consider upgrading Pedro Neto to Solly March in Game Week 10 if you want that Brighton midfielder, but I don't think that's a priority. And at this moment in time, I would favour Pedro Neto considering his form, and he's more of a talismanic figure for Wolves than Solly March is for Brighton. And I also expect a lot of rotation there for the Seagulls with the Europa League coming around. They've got a very tough group considering it is the Europa League, so that's only a consideration. That's not something I would definitely do. If you would rather have Matoma, then you could also find a way to get him in for Pedro Neto by downgrading Douglas Luiz to a cheaper midfielder as well. It could be an Anderson from Newcastle. You could go to other cheaper midfielders as well, like Cole Palmer, who's probably the best 5 million and below midfielder. He's still at 4.9 at the moment, and he is an injury doubt with a dead leg ahead of the game against Arsenal, but I think he will be available there. So despite the tough fixtures, Douglas Luiz down to Cole Palmer, Neto up to Mitoma could definitely be a consideration for you, and Saka in for Heung-min Son. I wouldn't make all of those transfers necessarily for Game Week 10 and taking a -4 hit, but you can spread those moves across 2 to 3 game weeks, and that way you can build a really good squad for the next 5 to 10 game weeks. I don't want to butcher this name because it is a great one. Ljubomir Krogsberg 5 says, I'm rolling, but I'm thinking when to bring in Haaland and how long do I go without him? It's a really good question, and for me, look, going without Haaland is always going to be a risk, but it is possible to do well without him. If you look back to part 1 of the Rating Your Teams video, there was an example I highlighted of someone in the top 50k without Erling Haaland, so it is definitely possible. I would try to bring Haaland back in by game week 11 if I had to put an exact time frame on it, if you can do it, of course, because you might have to take a lot of hits and make a lot of downgrades elsewhere in order to facilitate Erling Haaland into your squad. Alvarez is the best way of covering the Norwegian robot. You've already got Alvarez, so it's not the worst, scenario in the world. And you've got some other top assets in Trippier, Salah and Son. I think the worst thing is to go without Haaland and not have at least 2 of the other 3 players I just mentioned. So if you haven't used the wild card already and feel like Haaland is essential against Bournemouth in game week 11, I would use the chip, the wild card chip, in game weeks 10 or 11 to set that up and bring Erling Haaland back in. But Man City's fixtures are still relatively tough up until game week 16 when they start to turn. So if you don't bring Haaland in now or in game week 11, I would go without him until game week 16, where I feel he's as close to essential as you can be. Before then, I think you can go against him. But of course, in certain game weeks like 9 and 11 against Brighton and Bournemouth, that's where things can be extremely tough. So on screen, I've shown you some different examples of ways you can find the funds to bring Haaland back in. And they include Darwin to Archer, Diaz to Gordon, Son to Saka, and Alvarez to Haaland, but you'd still be a little bit short. And maybe one thing you could do is keep Alvarez and sell Watkins instead in future game weeks, but you'd still be a little bit short and it would require a downgrade or 2 elsewhere. So my advice is to either wildcard in game week 9 or 10 to then bring Haaland back in for game week 11, or just, be quite firm about it, decide to go without Haaland up until game week 16 when the fixtures turn for Man City, and from that point onwards, especially with a potential double in game week 20, I'd definitely bring Haaland back in for that time period, and instead you could wildcard a bit later on around game week 15. On screen, we have John Hamilton's team, and he says, "Hi Dylan, I used my wildcard last week." So you're in good shape. You've got a double up in Newcastle defensively, a triple up in Spurs, which you can start to maybe deviate away from in future game weeks. And what I would do from game week 10 onwards is to do Son, Douglas Luiz and Leno out for Saka, March and Johnston or Turner. Now, I wouldn't necessarily take a -4 hit to make all 3 moves in game week 10, but it's something you can consider. And ideally, you would spread these transfers across 3 or 4 game weeks. So that's what I would do. And in this way, you've got a very balanced squad, and you also are able to bring in Solly March. And I would start him, by the way, over Pedro Neto in game week 10. That's something else you can consider. And Johnston isn't going to be ideal, to be quite honest. You could just go for Turner's a bit cheaper, but Johnston still covers Crystal Palace defensively, and with Dean Henderson out for still quite a long while, I think he could be a really good goalkeeper option for you too. So I'm very happy with this setup with just a -4 hit really in game week 10, if not 2 free transfers, and then you can also make another one in game week 11. So I think you're in a very good position here. Of course, if you are trying to bring in Solly March, which isn't absolutely necessary, by the way, he's not going to be the most nailed on Brighton player, and the only 2 assets I'd be comfortable with in terms of minutes are Mitoma and Estupinian, and even those 2 aren't going to be, immune to rotation from Roberto De Zerbi. So that's something else you have to bear in mind too. But in terms of Douglas Luiz, I'd either downgrade him and then use those funds to upgrade another position, or I would continue going for 5 strong midfielders, and in this case you can go up to Ward-Prowse, Solly March, maybe even Diaby as well, to target the Luton Town fixture and the immediate short-term games there for Aston Villa, who are top of the FDR over the next 4 games. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but ultimately I try to bring in a Brighton midfielder if possible. If not, you've got Ward-Prowse and Diaby there to bring into. Bukayo Saka and for Son is quite simple really, and I think the rest looks really solid. The 5th team we're covering today is by J Smith FX8UJ. He says, "I was 4 million after using my wildcard in game week 5. Since then, I've used no other chips, but only gotten green arrows and just got into the top million." So really good stuff. 2 free transfers and 0.2 million in the bank. My updated transfer plans are Flecken to Areola this week, Morris to Ferguson and Maddison to Martinelli next week, with no hits involved. So really good plans, I have to say. You're in a great position as well. Some fantastic rank rises. And I personally think Flecken to Areola is a great transfer. You can do that even this week in game week 9. As much as I like Ferguson and Martinelli, I'm not convinced by those transfers. And the reason why is because with Martinelli, of course, he has the potential to be a great FPL asset. He's just come back from injury, scored the win against Man City. Great fixtures as well. But Maddison has been extremely consistent. And so long as he can stay fit, I would keep him for the foreseeable future. As for Ferguson, my issue with him is that Brighton rotate very heavily, especially the Europa League this season, and in the forward position, it's always between Danny Welbeck, maybe someone else like Ferguson himself, and a few other players in that position, so he's never going to be entirely nailed, not for the time being at least. He's a great talent, a lot of potential, but I would skip him FPL-wise for the time being, and the only two nailed-on Brighton assets are Estupiñán and Mitoma, and they aren't immune to rotation, as discussed earlier. So with the striker rotation at Brighton, coupled with the Europa League commitments, I wouldn't go for Ferguson. Instead, I would buy Areola for Flecken, as you say, this week, and then I would make the following moves for Game Week 10, all the way up until Game Week 12, depending on timing and when you want to get these transfers done. Son to Mitoma is one move you can make, Walker or Gvardiol to Gabriel, and Morris to Ollie Watkins, and you would still have quite a bit of money left in the bank to make those moves. If you decide to be very, aggressive, then this would be for a -4 hit in Game Week 10, because you would be bringing in Areola for Flecken in Game Week 9, and you'd still have 2 free transfers in Game Week 10. So getting in Mitoma, Gabriel, Watkins, and Areola for a -4 hit across 2 game weeks looks really good to me. I would consider it in your situation. You don't have to take that hit, but it also allows you to get Watkins at home to Luton. I think that is a really, high upside -4 hit, which can really benefit you, and you could have a really good foundation for the next 5 to 10 game weeks. Another Game Week 8 wildcarder is Ohshankly, and he says, "Hi Dylan, I used my wildcard last game week. I plan to roll the transfer in Game Week 9. However, I would love to have a Newcastle defender at least and have none at the moment. Your thoughts, cheers." And I think this is a very simple one. I would sell Tarkowski, who you had already, to either Burn, Botman or Gabriel. And since you said you want a Newcastle defender, I would just go for Burn or Botman if he's declared fit. I think either one is a really good transfer. And in the future, you can still bring in a Gabriel, and you can find ways of obviously finding the funds there. But your priority is getting a Newcastle defender and Tarkowski away to Liverpool, and I just don't trust Everton defensively. Obviously, you got the clean sheet against Bournemouth, enjoy that, and afterwards I think it's a very easy sell there for Tarkowski, and I would bring in a Newcastle defender as you wanted, and I think Dan Burn or Botman is the best way to go about it. Here we have Alan Zared 7200's team. He says, "I'm holding Bruno Fernandes for one more week against Sheffield United and rolling the transfer." And my suggestion here, obviously Game Week 9, your team looks fine. And in Game Week 10, you can make the following improvements for a -4 hit potentially. Heung-min Son to Saka, which is very popular, and I've discussed this many times in this video and even in part 1. Fernandes to Mitoma and Morris to Watkins. You can make all 3 transfers for a -4 hit, and you'd have 0.1 million in the bank. Now, there could be price falls and rises which go against you, and you could be priced out of these moves. But at the time of this recording, on the Tuesday, you are able to make all 3 transfers, and you have enough money there to pull it off. And I would highly recommend getting Watkins, Mitoma, and Saka in as part of that -4 hit. And when Fernandes plays Man City in Game Week 10, you've got Saka facing Sheffield United at home. You've also got Heung-min Son facing Crystal Palace away, to be fair, but you've got Mitoma at home to Fulham, and of course Watkins at home to Luton Town is a much better option than Carlton Morris. So I think this would be a great set of upgrades for your team. The only loss, in my opinion, is losing Heung-min Son, because he's still a good option down the middle, but ultimately you're improving upon your FPL squad. Next up is Nick 2010's team, and he says, "I wildcarded in Game Week 6, and good setup here for Game Week 9. I think there are some issues going into the future, and the way I would deal with it is Mbeumo out to either Mitoma or Gordon in Game Week 10, and you could use your second free transfer on Flecken to Johnston or Turner. I think that's the best way to tackle the next set of game weeks. I think the rest of your squad is absolutely fine. Of course, you can always pick holes in it. No Ollie Watkins against Luton Town at home, but you do have Alvarez, who's a great option in Game Weeks 9 and 11, and overall your 50-man squad looks very solid. So considering your budget and your team situation, having wildcarded in Game Week 6, I would bring in Mitoma or Gordon in for Mbeumo, and my preference would be Mitoma. Here we have Sherifgabr's team, and he says, "I'm thinking of doing Morris to Wissa, and wildcard hasn't been used. I'm planning to use it in Game Week 10. So obviously some very interesting things to pick out here. You've got a good squad as well, and what I would personally suggest is, while Wissa appears to be a good option against Burnley, I wouldn't recommend that transfer in the long term. But of course, you said it yourself, I'm looking to wildcard in Game Week 10, and I don't think that's a bad one-week punt necessarily. But Brentford have been struggling for form and have multiple key players out, and in particular, that injury to Rico Henry, the ACL injury, has been detrimental towards Brentford and their creativity. So what I'd personally do, if you maybe are reconsidering using the wildcard later in the season, is selling Sterling to Bowen this week and doing Mbeumo to Mitoma in Game Week 10. So those are some alternatives for you if you decide to hold off on the wildcard a little bit longer. But of course, you can just go with what you said originally, go for a 1 week punt, and then in Game Week 10, just wildcard. You could also consider using a cheaper midfielder, such as Gordon or Neto, and using those extra funds to upgrade Morris to Alvarez. And this could also help you, of course, with your wildcard plans. I would also get off Spurs defensively, at least that double up. And I also think going for Arsenal players such as Gabriel and Saka could be extremely beneficial towards your FPL team and your points from Game Week 10 onwards. If you don't go for these Arsenal players in Game Week 10, I would try to target them from Game Week 12 after they've played Newcastle away in Game Week 11. So those would be my suggestions for you. I think the wildcard in 10 is sound, and you can bring in Wissa as a 1 week punt. But if you decide to go for something a little bit different and holding off on the wildcard a little bit longer, I think Sterling to Bowen is a great transfer, and the same goes for Mbeumo to Mitoma. There are 5 teams left to rate, and this one is sent in by Big HO47, and he says, I'm going to change Son to Saka later. Thoughts? Thanks, Dylan. And once again, I think Son to Saka is a great move to make from Game Week 10 onwards. You could also find extra funds by downgrading a bench player in order to upgrade Neto to Mitoma if you really want that Brighton attacker in the future. But you don't have to do that, and Pedro Neto is still a good option, even against the likes of Newcastle home in Game Week 10, and you've got a decent bench overall. But that's something to consider. Maybe Pedro Neto up to a Mitoma, and you could downgrade one of your bench players potentially, but you don't have to. I don't think that's an absolute priority, and I think the biggest thing you need to concern yourself with is whether you keep or sell Son, and the only player I'd sell Son for, apart from Salah, who you already have, is Bukayo Saka. This team was sent in by Dryhill824's team, and he says, I plan to get Haaland in around Game Week 11 instead of Salah. The changes that I have to make are Trippier, Cher, Salah and Archer out to Botman, Romero, Gordon and Haaland in. What do you think? So your team looks really good for this week and also in Game Week 10. And then from Game Week 11 onwards, there's a lot of transfers and possible downgrades you have to make in order to facilitate Haaland and selling Salah as well. So what I think is, despite Haaland being the best captaincy option in Game Week 11 on paper and almost essential from Game Week 16 onwards, you're selling 2 top quality assets here in Salah, who faces Luton Town, by the way, in Game Week 11, and Kieran Trippier. I would probably hold on to Salah and Trippier for now and instead focus on diversifying your defence slightly. And what you could do is share to Gabriel or Estupinian once he comes back from injury. That could be a great move in the next couple of game weeks. If you still really want Haaland, then your transfers are sound. They're not absolutely awful. But my problem is you're selling Salah and Kieran Trippier, 2 amazing assets to bring in Haaland, who still has some poor fixtures up until Game Week 16 when the fixtures turned there for Man City. So my advice would be to just hold on to what you have and just focus on diversifying your defence a little bit, because I think a triple up in Newcastle is a bit too extra. The squad you see here is by Craig Meredith, and he says, Hi Dylan, I have 1 million in the bank and use the wildcard in Game Week 7. Injury news permitting plans are roll in Game Week 9, in Game Week 10 to do Burn to Gabriel and Diaby or Gordon to Mitoma or Maddison to Saka. Roll in Game Week 11 and reassess, and in Game Week 12, if I need to upgrade Alvarez, then I will do so by downgrading Son. I would love to get your thoughts. So, of course, really good setup for Game Week 9. No issues there. I can see why you're looking to roll. In Game Week 10, this is what I'd look to do, actually. I would rather sell Zuma instead of Dan Burn to buy Gabriel in Game Week 10. That's the first thing. Also, your other moves are sound, but I would just do Son to Saka directly in Game Week 10. If you want to keep Son for Game Weeks 10 and 11, then maybe delay that move up until Game Week 12. You could also be aggressive and take a hit to sell Alvarez to Watkins for that Luton Town fixture. It's not necessary, but it's something you can consider, especially if you're open to captaining an Aston Villa player like Ollie Watkins at home to Luton Town. So my suggestions would be Son to Saka directly in Game Week 10 or 12, and to do Zuma to Gabriel in Game Week 10 instead of selling Dan Burn. Brian Morrissey 554 says, wildcard played in Game Week 7, nice one, and also a very nice squad, I have to say that. So my suggestion in the future weeks is to do Flecken to Turner or Johnston, and also in terms of Son to Saka, as discussed before, it's not an essential transfer. You don't have to do it. And let's not forget, Son is playing down the middle. He's got more goal-scoring potential than Bukayo Saka right now. But I think Saka has more to his game and can also get the assists and more bonus points. He's also more of a consistent player than Heung-min Son, who is generally more explosive this season. So while it's not a priority, I would consider making that move in Game Week 10, Son to Saka. But I think in terms of the biggest upgrade you can do to your team, Flecken to Turner or Johnston is the best way to go about it. It It also gives you extra funds if you go down to Turner, and Flecken could be out in the long term, so let's keep an eye out for any updates we get from now until the Gameweek 9 deadline. But I think very simple stuff with your team because you are in a good position. I will do Son to Saka in Gameweek 10 and potentially Flecken to Turner or Johnston. The final team is sent in by Morera 1000, and he says, "Hi Dylan, I have 0.5 million in the bank, currently activated my wildcard, but was trying to get Alvarez in so to get some differences in our teams. Thoughts?" So you left this comment, I believe, in my best wildcard team video, so you have a good understanding of what kind of wildcard I would suggest. And using FPL.team, I can't see what your wildcard team is because of how it works, and with the team IDs, I can only see what your team was after the Gameweek 8 deadline, basically. So while I can't see your wildcard team, I can, assume based on your comments that it's going to be very similar to the best wildcard team I discussed there. Now, I would expect Saka and Saliba to be available for Gameweek 9, so if this is the case, you could still keep Saka or an Arsenal defender at least on your wildcard, which is a bit different to what I discussed in the best wildcard team video, instead of booking that transfer in Gameweek 10. As much as I like Alvarez, I believe he is a rotation risk against Brighton, regardless of whether he starts against Peru on Wednesday morning or not. At the time it's recording, it's the Tuesday, so you will find out by the time this video is published whether Alvarez starts or not, and that could play a part. But even if he does or not, whether he gets 60 minutes, 90, or only 45 or less, I still think Alvarez is a doubt to play against Brighton. If you're asking me, which way do you lean towards? Do you think he starts or not? I think Alvarez starts against Brighton. It's a crucial game, and Man City need to get back to winning ways, and De Bruyne is still out, and Alvarez is the best way to replace him. But I would prefer Watkins in the next 4 to 6 game weeks, which is why I went for Watkins on the wildcard video, and I think Alvarez will be the next best alternative, but there is a big difference, I think, with the fixtures in mind, and also with Watkins, you will never have this doubt about whether he will start or not. With Alvarez, you could from time to time with the Champions League, other competitions as well, of course, like the FA Cup from January onwards, but right now it's only the Champions League and Premier League, and I think Alvarez could be rotated potentially every now and again. Not that often, but still enough to be a little bit of a concern in certain game weeks. So I'd personally go for Watkins over Alvarez. I know you want to distinguish your team from my best wildcard team video, and I do appreciate that, of course, because everyone just having the same teams would be a bit boring, but that is a template, and I believe that's the best wildcard team for a reason. So I would go for Ollie Watkins over Alvarez. So that's it. We've covered 28 teams across both videos, 14 in part 1 and 14 in part 2. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Which one is your favorite, and which maybe pieces of advice would you give to these managers as well? Maybe it'll be even better advice than what I've given throughout these videos. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to the 300 likes, and let's keep on pushing towards 21,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon and channel memberships for early access to my videos, and also all my team reveals will be posted before anyone else will see them publicly, and you can also have exclusive badges and emojis to use in live streams and videos. There's the Discord server where there's a great community there for UCL Fantasy and FPL, my Twitter and Instagram, of course, where we can continue the discussion, and the FPL League where we have thousands of members already and the biggest UCL Fantasy League in the world. So I appreciate all of your support, of course. I wish you the best of luck for Gameweek 9 and the rest of the FPL season, and I'll see you next time.